With its vibrant, iridescent green hue, jade is one of the most beautiful stones on the planet. However, it's also one of the most expensive and heaviest. If you don't want to fork over the cash for it or bear the burden of the weight on your ears, then polymer clay might be the alternative for you. It's a lightweight and relatively cheap material that can be made to look almost like the real thing. In this tutorial, I will show you how to make your own pair of faux jade earrings in just a few simple steps. Welcome to My Modern Met Maker. We're going to be showing you some of the coolest crafts and the tools that you're going to need to complete them at home. My name is Lacey. I am My Modern Met's in-house maker, and I am so excited to get started. The supplies you're going to need are some polymer clay. I'm going to be using this teal and yellow as well as some translucent clay, but you could do this tutorial with whichever colors you like or what you have on hand. If you want to add a little extra sparkle to this, you can use some metal leaf. I have some copper metal leaf that I will be using. You'll also need some white paint, and this helps to kind of separate the colors we'll be mixing up today. As well as any of the tools that you prefer to use, I'm going to be using a roller and a slicer. You'll need some clay cutting shapes. I have an assortment here. I'm going to be focusing on the 2 circles. You can always cut out your shapes on your own if you don't have these cutters. For finishing, make sure you have some sort of sanding supplies. You can either use a Dremel-like tool like I will be using, or you can use some sandpaper. To finish off your earrings, you're going to need a variety of jewelry findings. We'll go over this more in detail later. You'll want some saran wrap or plastic wrap. You'll obviously need an oven and something to bake these on. You can either use a baking tray or a tile. Either one will work just fine for you. I almost forgot, you're also going to need some liquid Sculpey to hold everything together. I also recommend having some parchment paper for when you are cutting your shapes to transfer and then bake on so they don't become misshapen. And finally, at least 1 pair of needle nose pliers. To make a jade-like rock formation with polymer clay, we're going to want to mix up a few colors of green or that jade green color that differ slightly. I am mixing mine into translucent clay so that it's not fully opaque and it will have a bit of that rock-like feel to it. I recommend mixing at least 3 different versions of this color, a light and pale one, a slightly more vibrant, and one that is more of the base color. Ultimately, I decided to go with 5 different shades, and you'll see they are all very similar in color, but there are enough variation that it will look like some irregularities in the rock. The way that I mix my colors is I will take a chunk of the translucent clay, so it's going to probably be about 80% of the bulk of the color I'm mixing, and then I will add in different quantities of the colors that I am mixing in. In my case, I am doing the teal plus a little bit of yellow in different quantities. Remember, while you're mixing, you can always add more pigment, but it's really difficult to take it out, so start with less pigment than you think you're going to need, and you can always add some more. To actually incorporate these colors, what you do is you will roll them out, and as this becomes more workable, it'll look easier. At first, it's going to be a little bit of a struggle till it gets nice and warmed up, but you roll it out flat, then you're going to fold it over. Remember to fold and roll from the fold side towards the outside so that air bubbles are not trapped within. If you do find that you have some air bubbles at this point, it's not a big deal. You can pop those with an X-Acto knife or a toothpick and then continue rolling. It's better to find them now than once you've rolled everything out and baked them. Mix up all your colors to your liking. Here is my final color palette. Next, we're going to actually start chopping these up into irregular pieces, and we're going to be mixing this with a bit of that white paint, so it's going to get a bit messy. So I like to put out a piece of my cling film or plastic wrap to place the pieces that I'm cutting in there. In order for them to be pretty well dispersed, each color, I will chop up each color a few different times and add them in layers so that when I do mix everything together, it's already got a chance to have kind of dispersed within it, and there won't be one area that is fully saturated with just a single color. You can chop this with your cutter, an X-Acto knife, or you can even tear off pieces. We want these to be irregular in size and shape, so have some smaller, some bigger pieces, and the more irregularity you have, the more natural it's going to look. Next, we're going to actually add a little bit of white acrylic paint. I am using a white acrylic flow paint from Artist Loft that I purchased from Michaels. And you don't want to add too much paint because you don't want it to be too clumpy. We want just enough paint that it's going to nicely cover each of these irregular shapes we cut fully without having big chunks of paint. I do this by putting it on the saran wrap and just mixing with my fingers because I don't mind getting a little bit messy. You could technically put this in a Ziploc bag and shake it up if you don't want to get too messy. But we do need to let this dry between layers, so putting it on the saran wrap is going to allow us to have a nice flat layer to speed up our drying time rather than having it in an enclosed bag or something that air can't circulate into. Make sure it's nice and mixed up and leave it to dry. I usually come and visit this about an hour later and toss some of the pieces around to make sure the bottom parts are going to be dry as well. Once dry, if you want a little extra metallic sparkle in there, you can go ahead and rip up a piece of your metal foil. I'm using copper here into various sizes and just put it on top of those white coated pieces of our jade color. Because we added acrylic paint as well as some of that foil, the clay isn't going to stick together, so we need to rectify that by adding some of the liquid Sculpey. Drizzle some of this on top, just enough to where when you mix it all together, it again will just coat it nicely so everything can stick together. I like to add some, mix it up to see how well things are sticking together, and if necessary, add a little bit more. Mix the pieces together with that liquid Sculpey and start forming and pressing so that all the air escapes and so that you have one solid block. It will be easier to cut if you can start to kind of shape this into a rectangular log shape while it's still in that plastic wrap. Take your jade cane and slice up even thin slices of this jade colored clay. I like to prearrange my pattern by putting out a few of these pieces, and then I actually rip some of the pieces up so they have more jagged edges so that we don't constantly have those real flat butting up edges. You can also use some of the pieces you pull off to fill in any gaps where things aren't quite fitting together. When you're rolling out your slab, you have two options. If your slab of jade is thick enough and is adhering together when you roll it into a nice sheet, then you can go ahead and cut directly from it. However, if you're needing a little more stability, you can take some scrap color or some translucent color or something similar and roll out a sheet of a similar size first, that's really thin, and then place this jade slab on top before you cut those pieces out. I like to put my slab onto something movable like a piece of tin foil or parchment paper before I go ahead and actually cut out my pieces. I find that if I cut directly onto the tile or something like that, it sticks, and then when I try to get it off, it will warp my shape. For this pair of earrings, I'm going to be doing 2 large circles and 2 smaller circles that will be connected to each other. Now, you'll see that that doesn't look like the smartest placement, but I am trying to get similar patterns or color distributions in the tops and the bottoms so that the earrings will look nice and balanced together as a set. My slab was large enough that I was able to cut out a few different versions. Some of those are just backups in case one doesn't bake very well, but some of them are going to be other experiments. The next thing I like to do, you can drill all of your holes at the end, but I like to pre-mark where those holes are going to be, and I typically do this with a toothpick. If you're careful, that means that you can just have these holes already baked in, and after some cleanup, they're going to be great. Or if, like me, you are going to be using a drill, I find that having these pre-marked, one, it saves some time on the end, but also it works kind of as a countersink so that the drill doesn't slip around and it knows exactly where you want that hole to be, so it gives you cleaner holes. An extra step that can help make these even nicer, in case you have fingerprints or lint on here, is to take some rubbing alcohol and a Q-tip and just wipe off the surfaces before you bake. Then we want to do our first bake, and I say first bake because I am going to be making studs, and the way I like to fasten my studs on are to actually build them into the earring itself, and I like to do that in a two-step process so that I don't warp the first part of the earring. So you're going to want to bake at the instructions that your clay says. Mine is to bake at 275 Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. Here are my components. They baked up really nicely, nice and even, and no air bubbles, thankfully. I want to add studs to the back. If you wanted to add ear wires, you would just need to move on to the next steps before adding those. But if you want to add studs like me, you're going to want to kind of make a plan. So the hole that I poked in these is actually going to be the attachment hole to attach them to the other circle. In order to balance the weight on your ear, you want to actually put the stud near the top, so you're going to want it directly across and towards the top on the circle on the opposite side of the hole you've pre-poked. Then we want to roll out a small amount of the excess clay that we had from our jade cane, and we're going to trace around that top circle so we know how big it's going to be. Then we will poke a hole using the stud back through that piece or that pancake we made of clay and place it on top of the baked top. In order to get the bake side to properly adhere to the unbaked side, we need some of that liquid Sculpey. I had a little excess that dripped down the bottle, and waste not, want not, so I'm just going to use that little bit that's there because we don't need much. Then we're going to stick this on and make sure that the stud is placed in the right position for the bottom holes. And you can either do this by eye, or since it's on the opposite side, you can do something like stick a toothpick through the back so that we know where that is and we have it in the right position. Then clean up the edges, so anywhere around where that stud is, as well as the two parts where they are going to meet, so you've got nice clean edges. Once you're happy that they are nicely joined, you can go ahead and bake this top part again following the instructions on your Sculpey clay. Mine is going to be at 275 for 30 minutes again. After the second bake, you want to clean up any of the rough edges you have, either by using a fine grit sandpaper by hand, or you can use a Dremel attachment drill to actually sand these off in a really quick way. If you're going to be using a power tool to do your sanding, make sure you're using the proper safety precautions. Put on your safety glasses for sure, and consider a respirator because this is going to kick up a lot of dust. These finishing steps are always the most tedious, but they will make a huge impact on your final result. So you're going to also want to clean up any of your holes to make sure that they are nice and clean, and you'll actually be able to put your jewelry findings through them cleanly, and they can sway and hang really nicely. And then finally, we are almost at the finish line, so we're going to take our parts that have been nice and cleaned up, and we're going to grab the findings that we're going to need. 2 jump rings. You're going to want a larger size jump ring if you would like some movement in your earrings, and these are going to connect our small to our big circle. So you'll also want some pliers that are going to help you open and close these jump rings. We've already used the studs, so we need the backs just so we can close them off on our ears. If you're brand new to using jump rings, remember, do not pull the 2 pieces away from each other. You're going to pull them to the side because metal does not always want to go back together, and so you have a better chance of actually getting a nice tight fit by moving it to the side instead of pulling away from each other. With the earring backs on, they are ready to go, and I love these. I am a huge rock nerd. I always have been, and if I had found a rock that looked like this, it would have definitely gone in my special rock box that I still have to this day. I absolutely love these, and the polymer clay on them makes them nice and lightweight. So even though I would love to have these as actual stones on my ears, I do really like the fact that they're lightweight because they're polymer clay, and so I won't have that ear fatigue after wearing them. Thanks for watching My Modern Met Maker. If you're inspired to try this craft, you can find the links to purchase the materials you'll need in the description box below. Stick around because in just a minute we're going to be talking in depth about one of the really useful tools that we used in this video. Welcome to Tool Talk. Today we're going to be talking about rubber bench blocks. This may just seem like a hunk of rubber, but it's actually a really useful tool if you do a lot of jewelry making, drilling, or hammering. The three main things I use my rubber bench block for are drilling, noise reduction, and working with small components. One benefit of using a rubber bench block for drilling is that you can place your piece or your component directly on the bench block, drill straight through the piece until you actually hit the rubber on the other side, feeling a bit of resistance. This is going to ensure that you're drilled all the way through, you have a nice clean hole, and it won't damage your actual work surface. Instead, you'll just have a little bit of stippling on this rubber bench block that still remains nice and flat to work on. My favorite use for my rubber bench block is noise reduction. If you've ever done any metal stamping, hammering, or texturing, you know it can get pretty noisy. Now, a rubber bench block is not going to completely eliminate your need for ear protection, but it can help reduce the amount of noise. I place my rubber bench block between my bench and my metal stamping plate, and it helps to make it less noisy when I am hammering away. The final thing I use mine for is that it actually, since it's rubber, has quite a bit of grip. So if I'm working with small components and doing fine detail work, I can place it on here and it won't slide around as much as working on a hard wooden surface or something else that doesn't have any grip on it. Rubber bench blocks come in a variety of shapes and sizes. This is a 4x4 by 1 inch block. They can be bought from a variety of stores for about $10 to $15. Let me know in the comments if you have a rubber bench block and what you like to use yours for.